Okay, let me explain more about the sacred assumption in cults, my number two. Because people get very, very set on the idea that cults are religious, and this is not how it goes. So, first we start with worldview, and then I'll get to the sacred assumption, which is my turn. And I'll read you a little bit about that from the book that I'm writing, The Culting of America. I'm Daniella, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and going into the cult of the U.S. Army. You can get signed copies here. I have a master's degree from Harvard in organizational psychology. Now I'm writing a book called The Culting of America, where I'm taking all 10 of these things and breaking them down, but I'm showing them to you in cults, in the military, and then in organizations around you. So the worldview is very important because all cults require you to have a worldview shift. You have to adopt the worldview of the leader or leadership or the group, because there's not always just a single leader, JWs. So people get confused on this because the most famous cults we've had are religious. But there have also been really famous yoga cults. There have also been famous exercise cults. There's one called E2M that just blew up, that somebody that I know and love very dearly was a part of. There are friend group cults. There are single family cults. There are abusive relationship, 1-1 cults, right? There's all kinds of different cults. Honestly, anything in the personal transformation space, which includes college and religion, are places that you will find predators that show up to build these systems to abuse you. Now, a lot of wannabe cult leaders will use religion. In my opinion, this is because the majority of religions, in addition to being like established and having a body of work and a body of believers, they have thought-stopping cliches built right in, right? Every single one that I know of has, well, we can't explain this, so you just have to trust it on faith, right? Now, when these religions are built, the difference between religions and cults, in my opinion, religious groups, right? Because religion is an idea, cult is a group. Religious groups they're intending to do it for good, right? Yes, they have these thought-stopping cliches built in. Yes, they have, I think religion is silly, but they're trying to do it to help people get along, okay? Cults are not. So then, once you have your worldview shift, that worldview shift brings you under the sacred assumption. Let me read to you what that is. So, it might sound like what scholars typically call a conversion process, but Dr. Janja Lalich clarifies that the conversion process by which a person develops a new perspective in life, in the cult, I prefer the term worldview shift to identify the internal change that takes place as a person adopts a new perspective or worldview and becomes a practicing adherent. And then when we get out of our cults, we have to deconstruct that worldview. Don't forget that. Cults don't always require religious devotion. What they really want is for you to completely shift from whatever beliefs you originally had until you're fully aligned with their ideology and trapped by what I like to call their sacred assumption. I came up with the term sacred assumption about 15 years after I left the cult I grew up in at age 15. It was after years of people asking me over and over again, how could anyone justify things like prostitution and pedophilia as the will of God? Things my own family and tens of thousands of others accepted in the Children of God cult. The sacred assumption explains how even the most intelligent and vulnerable people, like actresses in the NXIVM cult, could allow themselves to be branded without anesthesia. It also sheds light on why American soldiers willingly sacrifice their lives rather than let the flag touch the ground. Once your worldview has shifted so completely and you become so entrenched in the group's mentality, you can justify anything under the sacred assumption. In the Children of God, the sacred assumption was that David Berg, a regular basic white guy and failed preacher from California, was actually the prophet of God. As long as that belief held, members could rationalize any atrocity. In NXIVM, the sacred assumption was that Keith Raniere, another basic white man with a string of business failures, was the smartest man on earth. His followers never questioned it, blindly believing in his supposed genius and the executive success program he invented. In the U.S. Army, the sacred assumption is the belief that the U.S. flag, and by extension, America, is worth unaliving for. This belief led hundreds of thousands of us into Iraq and Afghanistan, following orders to unalive, thinking we were deserving of honor. It is the same kind of thinking that led women in Nexium to hold down their sisters as they were branded with Keith Raniere and Allison Mack's initials. And it's why thousands of adults in the Children of God read the Davidito book, a 762-page manual that normalized PDFing and didn't flinch even when told to do the same to their own children. Under the grip of the sacred assumption, people can justify absolutely anything. As long as members of these groups held on to their sacred assumption, they were able to justify anything, all because they couldn't or wouldn't ask themselves, could we be wrong? The term cognitive dissonance actually came out of studying cults. A man with a conviction is a hard man to change. Leon Festinger opens his groundbreaking book, When Prophecy Fails. Back in 1954, Festinger and his colleagues found a small UFO cult that believed the world would end on December 21st of that year. These social psychologists decided to go undercover and study the cult's members before and after the event. Their hypothesis was that when the predicted apocalypse didn't happen, the cult wouldn't just dissolve. And they were right. What they discovered was that many members didn't abandon their belief at all. In fact, they doubled down on it, working even harder to convert others. This reaction completely went against what people thought about human rationality. You'd think if something you believed didn't come true, you'd give it up, right? But instead, these people felt the need to reinforce their belief by trying to get others on board. As if recruiting new believers helped lessen the mental discomfort of being wrong. The whole experience led to the coining of cognitive dissonance, now regarded as one of the biggest breakthroughs in social psychology. Skipping a few paragraphs. So basically, people can hold on to even the wildest ideas as long as they've got a group backing them up. It's the social reinforcement that helps them stick to their guns, even when the evidence says otherwise. This explains why, when a cult's prophecy fails or its beliefs are disproven, members don't just walk away. They double down, try to convince others, and lean into their belief even harder. The power of the group dynamic can make people feel like they're part of something bigger, which helps them push away doubts and maintain their faith, no matter how illogical it might seem. And of course, there's quite a heavy dose of sunk cost fallacy here, and we'll talk more about that in the chapter on entrance and exit costs. In cults, with the benefit of hindsight, it's usually easy to spot the sacred assumption that leads to cognitive dissonance. But in other groups, ones we don't typically think of as cults, the sacred assumption can be as simple as believing that our team, our family, or our religion is right, just because it's ours. Teams researcher J. Richard Townsend points out that humans will go to great lengths to fit in with groups they've chosen to join. That's the thesis of my book, Uncultured, which you can get signed copies of here. We want to belong, and we'll often convince ourselves that belonging means agreeing. In some way or another, every cult is preaching the message that they are the best, the only way to do life. Singer and Lalich tell us that almost all cults make the claim that their members are chosen, select, or special, while non-members are considered lesser beings. It can even be found in cult naming conventions. Some cults start their names with the, implying that theirs is the only way to be, think, or live. If you notice, my name is not the knitting cult lady. They tell us in cults in our midst, examples include the True Believers, the Way International, the Walk, the Process, the Foundation, the Body, the Farm, the Assembly, the Family. That's the sacred assumption. I've written like 35 more pages on it.